Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet. My co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jason. How are you doing this week?
It's been a good week, just getting back into the swing of things, kids back in school and all that sort of stuff. I think sort of life returning to sort of that normal kind of routine and stuff. So how about you? Everything good?
It's good. I'm pretty sleep deprived. As I mentioned, I think 2 episodes back, my wife and I had our first baby in August, and we're adapting to that. And we've settled into a rhythm, but the sleep schedule has taken quite the hit. That's hard to get used to. We're doing our best, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. But yeah, it's quite something to survive on, 2 hours of sleep here and there.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are a new listener to the YYC Soccer Podcast, what is it all about, Scott?
So our podcast focuses on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We talk about the teams and we interview the players and the coaches from the city's soccer community, from the grassroots and amateur leagues up to the university and professional level.
In this episode, we're going to cover a bunch of Cavs things. We're going to talk about the match against Ottawa last week. We're going to preview the upcoming 2 matches this week against Forge and Halifax. There's a couple of roster moves the Cavs made that we'll talk about, and also the U21 minutes update, which is becoming a weekly thing now. We'll also talk a little bit of U Sports and review what happened in week 2, and ACAC college season starts this week. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that as well.
Yeah, once again, we have a lot of Cavalry content to digest and discuss, and we also have our first interviews pertaining to SAIT's upcoming 2023 season, which you alluded to there. I think it's another good episode, and I'm happy to jump right into it.
Let's get right to it. And yeah, it is definitely a bit of a Cavs-centric episode, but I have to say that I think we saw something kind of big last weekend with the Cavs win. They went into Ottawa, and it was a 2-1 victory for the Cavs, the first time they've ever won in Ottawa. And really, it was like a very impressive game, in my opinion. I thought it was like one of those games I think that they're going to look back on, and could be a real touchstone moment for the season. What do you think, Scott?
I think touchstone moment is the perfect way to describe it. And I think if Cavalry wins the CPL this year, this match in particular is going to be one that's looked at as like a big statement. Cavalry marches into Ottawa, a city they've consistently struggled to get a result in, and they leave with 3 points, and they get those 3 points thanks to a last-second winning goal, almost the last kick of the game. So yeah, once again, it was Willie Akio. He's had an immediate impact since he signed with Cavalry, scoring the winning goal in like the 97th minute. But as dramatic as the finish was to the match, I actually really want to give props to Cavalry's defenders and defensive midfield for a strong performance. I was digging through the stats before recording this, and I just want to rattle off a few statistics that jumped out to me. Cavalry kept Ottawa to a 0.59 XG. They kept Atletico to just 9 touches in their 18-yard box. They limited them to 1 shot on target. They won 60% of duels, including 66.7% of aerial duels, and they intercepted 8 passes. So I think it's clear that Cavalry wanted this win more than Ottawa did. They had a solid game plan, and they just executed it really well.
Can't argue with that. I thought defensively they looked good. They looked like they had a plan. Even a situation where you brought in a new guy like Tom Field, who's an old new guy, I guess, but he came in later on in the game, and he, I thought, really looked like you would never know that the guy hadn't played at this level for almost 2 years. He played really well in a relief role. And Willie Akio, geez, I don't know what else you can say. The guy's on fire. He just seems to score at will. The Cavs really kind of showed that they wanted it more.
And they finally, like you said, got a result in Ottawa against a team they've always struggled to get results against. And before we kind of move on, I think we have to talk about Tommy Wheeldon Jr.'s gesture that the One Soccer cameras caught, where he put his hands to his ears, kind of similar to how Jose Mourinho did it a few years back. Very iconic moment, and just kind of gestured to the fans like, can't hear you, or something along those lines. And just today, I think I saw news that Wheeldon Jr. was named the CPL's Coach of the Month, which seems to have really earned. Kudos to him and his team and his coaching staff for for putting out a great performance.
Let's jump ahead now and talk about this upcoming week. And there's going to be 2 matches. They're both on the road. On Saturday, they're going to go to Hamilton and play Forge. And then after that, presuming they're probably going straight from Hamilton there. But on Tuesday, they're going to HFX Wanderers in Halifax, and they're going to play out there. So a couple games in a relatively short period of time, long road trip.
Right. Well, I think that's probably because Spruce Meadows is hosting the Masters at the moment. Sure, when that wraps up, yeah, obviously Cavalry has to share their pitch with horses every summer. So this is going to be a tough road trip for them. I think you're right. They're not going to return back to Calgary and then fly all the way to Halifax the next day. So they're going to be away from home for a while, and they're going to have some tough matches. Halifax has, like I mentioned last week, had some really strong runs this season, and Forge is always a tough team, especially when you're playing them at Tim Hortons Field. It's windy, it's a big pitch. Forge seem to usually have good home form, so not an easy week for Cavalry. They do have a bit of breathing room at the top of the CPL table right now, 4 points, but I imagine they're going to want to come home from this 2-match road swing with at least 4 points from these 2 games so that they can maintain a little bit of breathing at the top.
Yeah, I think they're playing a couple of tough opponents, but I think they're going to fully be expecting to get something out of this. Like, I think if they don't come back with some results and some points, I think they'll be disappointed. And, at this point, if you did come back with nothing, that you've got the other teams are creeping right up on you. So I think there's definitely some pressure to make sure to get something out of all this. And I think that the way they're playing right now, I think it's entirely possible that, they can go into Hamilton and Halifax and get something.
Yeah, and a win against Forge would be huge because that would put Cavalry 7 points ahead of Forge. Cavalry is currently on 39. Forge is on 35. Pacific is also on 35. And it seems like Cavalry is now definitely the front runner to claim that regular season championship. I can't remember what that's called. It is an accolade now that teams want. There's more than just the overall playoff championship to play for, which I know Cavalry that's their end goal. They're going to want to win that regular season title as well.
So as we've been doing the last several weeks, we're going to now talk about the U21 minutes. And just as a recap, if anyone's not familiar with the CPL rules, every club must achieve 2,000 minutes played by domestic U21 players. After 22 matches, the latest numbers are the Cavs have 1,430 minutes. So they have 6 games remaining, and they need to average out 95 minutes per game in order to achieve that goal. And in this last match, they got, I actually didn't calculate the exact number of minutes, but Gareth Smith-Doyle started in the Ottawa match, and he played about an hour, and Mail Henry came in, played about 20 minutes, I think. And he was actually involved in that winning goal with Willie Akiao, but they didn't get a full 90 between the two of them, but they actually fell behind a little bit on sort of the expected pace at this point.
I'm wondering how they're going to resolve this because they've been above that 90-minute average for the last couple of games, basically ever since we started talking about how they're still quite a bit short of the required minutes. But at this point, they have four guys left who can generate minutes for them. Michael Harms, who I think we'll talk about soon, just signed a pro contract with Cavalry. He's only 17. I think he's going to get at least a couple more games, though. And then, Mail Henry, definitely a guy who I think is going to be starting the majority of games if he's fit and getting at least an hour or more per game of playing time. And then Gareth Smith-Doyle, who's mostly been a sub this season, but as you mentioned, got the start in that last one. And then the only other U21 player they really have is backup goalkeeper Joseph Holiday. I was trying to figure out, has Marco Carducci played every single minute this season?
Every minute
of every game. So I do wonder if Holiday is going to see the pitch. He had one game for FC Edmonton last year, right on the last game of the regular season, if I'm recalling correctly. But I think what they have to do is get, 2 or 3 of these guys playing a good chunk of minutes in at least one game, and maybe they could get like 150 to 200 minutes in one fell swoop. That would be really good for them.
So here's my call on this. I think if they get 3 points against Forge, they're going to go to Halifax and they're going to play a heavily rotated squad. All of these guys are going to get starts, I think, is what's going to end up happening. I think that, in my opinion, it's a long road trip. The two games are close together. I've got to get these U21 minutes. And I also have some players that have been sitting on the bench that I want to give them a chance to get out there and show that they deserve to be in this lineup on the stretch run. You know, guys like Fraser Aird and Ben Fisk and Joe Mason, who, you know, they've kind of all become a little bit forgotten the last little bit. So I could totally see a scenario where they could go to Halifax and tell all of their regular high minutes players saying, hey, great job in Hamilton, guys. You're going to sit around and enjoy this one from the bench and maybe come on as subs. Realistically speaking, even if the Cavs don't get the full 3 points in Hamilton, I still think we're going to see at least a partially rotated squad for Halifax. I don't think we're going to see two games within like a few days of each other with the absolute, like the high minute players for full 90 minutes times two.
Mm-hmm. And all four of these U21 players do play different positions. So it is feasible that they could all be on the pitch at the same time. And I think you're right in the sense that the Halifax game, pending a good result against Forge, is a great opportunity to get some of these minutes that they really do need, and give these players a chance to show what they can do and gain some experience that's going to be valuable in the long run, right? Like, if you want young players on your team, you do have to play them. You do have to give them experience. And if they have a 7-point lead over their main rival and a 4, 6, or 7-point lead over the second place team, depending on how Pacific does, yeah, why not? Why not field all of them or 3 of them?
Let's talk a little U Sports. This past weekend was the second weekend of the U Sports soccer season. I guess right now, probably the two teams in Calgary that are probably worth mentioning first would be the Mount Royal men's team and the Dinos women's team. Both of them are in the top 10 of the national rankings right now. The Dinos women, they're 3-0. They're ranked 9th nationally. And Mount Royal men's are leading their division. They're 3-0 and they're ranked 7th nationally. So both teams are on good runs and playing well and are certainly looking like they're contenders for Canada West and nationally ranked.
Yeah, I knew the Dinos women were going to be strong this year based on their performance last season and the fact that they have a lot of returning players who had last year as an experience gaining year, and now they're coming in as second or third year players with, you know, a little bit more development, a lot more experience. So I'm not surprised how well they've been doing. And similar with Mount Royal, who looked a really strong team last year. In terms of the rankings, I never really know what to make of the rankings. For instance, McEwen on the women's side is 4-0, and they're not ranked in the top 10 yet. You don't even need those to see how well these two Calgary teams are playing.
Yeah, I always think these rankings, they're interesting to talk about, but you always got to take them with a bit of a grain of salt, because what do they really mean? Like, the first thing I looked at on the women's rankings is McEwen's not in the top 10. How's that possible? You know, and I know even in the NCAA rankings, I've been kind of paying attention a little bit to how the University of Memphis women's team is doing. And, you know, I know they lost a match a couple weekends ago to Alabama, and they still went up in the rankings. You know, their one game they played that week and they lost, and they still went up in the national rankings from like 18 to 17 or something like that. Weirdly unpredictable, but fodder for a podcast like ours, I guess.
I suppose. Yeah. It actually reminds me a lot of if people follow high school football in Alberta, which I actually do quite closely. Sometimes, you know, people complain because their kids' team is 5-0 and their school's not ranked in the top 10 by Football Alberta, and then a team that's like 3-2 is ranked 7th or 6th. It all depends on who they're playing against and past performances, past seasons, and all that kind of thing. But it's like a convoluted formula that I've never really delved into to determine why it is what it is. But definitely, you're right. It's something that we can bring up on the podcast, and it does show, you know, that these two teams in Calgary are doing really well.
We wanted to touch on the ACAC season. So the college season starts a little bit later than the U Sports season, but it is happening this weekend. And SAIT is the local traditional powerhouse, both on the men's side and on the women's side. We wanted to get a little bit of a feel for the upcoming season and how preparations have been going. We were able to interview Jess Whyte. She is an assistant coach with the SAIT women's team. And we're going to run that interview in a little bit. But any thoughts right now about the upcoming season in general on the college side, Scott?
Yeah. So SAIT, just for some background before we run that interview with Jess, SAIT's women's team was absolutely dominant last year during the regular season. Won all but one of their matches and only conceded goals to one team, which was Red Deer Polytechnic, who went on to win the ACAC championship. Unfortunately for SAIT, their season came to a very surprising end in the quarterfinals of the postseason in penalty kicks. Overall, I mean, it's classic North American sport where you have a really, really good campaign that, can become derailed by one less than great performance in the playoffs. But overall, you're right that SAIT is a traditional powerhouse. I know they went to nationals, I think, in 2021 and finished, I want to say, second or third. So overall, a very strong program. John Tallarico is the head coach of that program and has been for, I think, at least, I don't even want to say how many years, but I remember talking to him in 2019 about SAIT. So it has some continuity in the coaching side. And even though the players, they come and go at the ACAC level, because most of these players are only in their program for 2 years in terms of education.
Yeah, so we're going to run that interview now.
I'd like to welcome Jessica Whyte to the podcast. Jess is the SAIT women's assistant coach, and she's also the girls director and assistant technical director at Mackenzie United Soccer Club. Jess, thanks for coming on the podcast this week.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So we know that SAIT's first game is right around the corner. How have preparations been throughout the preseason?
I think they've been pretty good. We have some new faces joining us, so it's always great to have that, and they have some quality to them, so I'm excited to see them in the regular season. And obviously we've been working really hard the last 3 weeks, and we have our home opener on Friday, so it should be an exciting season for us.
And that's against Ambrose?
That's correct.
Jess, how would you characterize last season? You had a regular season was pretty dominant, but then unexpectedly you ended up out in penalty kicks in the playoffs. How would you categorize the season in general, though?
Not many teams go 11-1, so the vibe or the greatness of the season was kind of taken away by losing in PKs in the quarterfinal, and obviously wasn't a position that we expected to be in, but it was a chance for us to learn and grow from it. I think, like you mentioned, we had a very dominating season in the South, and I think just the nerves and the anxiousness and maybe the expectations of us in the quarterfinal kind of, got to us. But I do have to say that the Nate keeper was very good and stood on her head. So just sometimes that's the way the soccer gods treat the games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking more about that regular season, I was looking over your record, and it was, you guys were scoring more than 6 goals per game, and almost all your regular season games were clean sheets. So what do you feel was the reason for such a strong showing, both offensively and defensively?
I think our seniors. I think we had a lot of leadership kind of in the middle of the field, also up top and in the back. So I think a lot of experience in the ACAC season really kind of came into play there, scoring goals and obviously being in net in our back line.
So, Jess, I guess right now you already kind of addressed this, but what those lessons that you learned from last year, how are you going to apply them this year for the team, to the players that are coming back and also to the new players coming in?
I think we say it every time, but it's really just taking it game by game and learning from each game, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think we have to know that it's anybody's game when we want to, get to provincials. And when we do get to provincials, it could be anybody's game. It doesn't matter sometimes what the regular season is. So I think a lot of our seniors are applying that in terms of training too. Don't underestimate anyone. Train as hard as you can, so that we're just really prepared for each game, no matter who we're playing or who we are.
Jess, one thing you talked about in your very first answer was the new faces this year. And you also mentioned how last year the seniors played such a pivotal role. Can you talk a little bit about who are some of the new additions to the squad? And kind of a double part question, but could you also bring up who maybe some key holdovers from 2022 are?
Yeah, our keeper, Erin Morgan, is one of our returning seniors and was a big part of a lot of our clean sheets last year. So she will be in net. We also have Michaela, our center back, who's also returning. So those will be kind of two very key positions in the back. Up top, we have our striker, Megan Weed, who unfortunately got a little bit of an injury at the end of the regular season last year. So we're excited to have her back up top. And for the new faces, genuinely, everyone's been a contributing member in training. It's been very exciting, the pool of players that we've won. I think Rochelle is a big one. She's a first year at SAIT, and she plays up top and in the mid, and she's very dynamic and good with her feet. So we're excited to see her there. And I think another big face that's returning is Nicole Charlton in the midfield, who's probably one of the most dynamic midfielders I've coached. So she's really taken on that senior lead role. So there's lots of names I can mention, but I think those are kind of some of the key for you.
Considering that most of the players that are playing for SAIT aren't with the team for maybe as long a time as compared to U Sports, a lot of times it's just for a couple of years. How does that really change the program culture, or how does that change the chemistry, considering there's always turnover in post-secondary, but probably even a little bit more so in the ACAC level?
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, it's the ACAC in general, so it happens to every team. So it's kind of like every team goes through their cycle at different points, and they're stronger at some points and rebuilding at others. I think it really just puts a focus on the team bonding, the team chemistry, because you can have new faces every year or every 2 years, and your complexion can look very different. So I'm a big believer in who you are off the field together is a big reason for your success on the field. So I think that's a big focus for sure.
And comparing ACAC soccer with U Sports, Jess, that's something I like to try and do. Do you have an opinion on what maybe the main differences between the two levels are? Is the quality of the leagues comparable in your eyes?
I think at some points it is. Yeah, obviously it's classified based on what institutions offer for degrees and programs and stuff like that. I think there's some really good quality ACAC teams that could compete with some of the U Sport teams. Obviously, there's some very good U Sport teams that I think are like the top in the country. So it really is more about what the institutions offer and what everyone's looking to take.
And one last question from me, Jess, will be about the team's objectives. I think I know what you're going to answer given how last year went, but can you talk a little bit about what's talked about in the locker room and on the bench and when the team is together in terms of where you hope to be at the end of October?
Yeah, our long-term goal is to be in provincials, to be in the top 3. Obviously, a big goal would be to be South or the first in the South. Our mini goals, our weekly goals of training are to improve on from our last performance and to come into every training session and every game with respect for our opponents, but respect for who we are. I always say if you want to be the best in the league, you have to train like you're the worst in the league. So I think that's kind of a mini goal or mini theme that we've put into every training session this year.
Thanks again, Jess, for taking the time to do the interview, and we wish you all the best in the upcoming season and beyond.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me on.
All right. I'd like to thank Jess Whyte for doing the interview with us today and giving us a little bit of an update on the SAIT Women's program for this year. And we are going to endeavor to get more comments and interviews from ACAC sources as the season goes on, and we'll kind of keep tabs on it and see where it all goes. And in fact, I think we're even going to try and do a little bit of coverage on Ambrose, because Ambrose is their Calgary school, and their program is certainly not the powerhouse that SAIT is, but that's no reason to not give them a little bit of attention on the podcast. So I think in the future, maybe we'll even do a little bit of chatting about them, and especially if they can pull out a couple victories this year. So I think they've had a bit of a dry spell the last couple years on both the men's and women's side.
Yeah, and Ambrose on the women's side, their first game is against SAIT, so that is happening the day that this podcast comes out. Definitely a tough one for them, and I'm curious to see how that game is going to go, a Calgary derby to start the season.
Yeah, actually, I think also the men are playing Ambrose as well. I think one of the things I noticed in the schedule for ACAC, generally speaking, is they usually play their matches as a doubleheader, the same two schools playing each other, either the women's game first and then the men's second, vice versa. And that's what's happening on Friday. The matches, it's SAIT Ambrose. I believe the women is the first match, and I think the men is the second match, if I'm not mistaken, Friday night.
That's interesting. I'm surprised I didn't know that. And I'm wondering if they tag team on transportation and stuff, if the two teams take the same bus, for instance. But
so before we wrap up here, one more topic we kind of are tacking onto the agenda here at the end, and we're going back to the Cavs again. The Cavs did announce a new signing today, and the new signing is Tate Asante, and he is a 17-year-old midfielder, and he has been playing with the Cavs U21 teams in League One Alberta and in the AMSL this past summer. And now he signs on with a developmental contract. The other bit of info about him is he's a product of the New Frontier Soccer Club. That's the club that a lot of the Dinos men's coaches are involved with. Do you know much about this this new signing here, Scott? I have to admit, I don't know too much.
I didn't know. I have the press release in front of me, so I'll read what Tommy Wheeldon Jr. was quoted as saying about him. Tate has shown a lot of high potential qualities that we like. He is a very mobile and athletic midfielder with a good sense of the game on both sides of the ball. We've enjoyed watching him play with energy and enthusiasm with our U21s, and he's adapted quite well training with the professionals. So it seems like he has trained with the first team and done a good job with the U21s. Yeah, kind of last push of the season. He's going to be, probably on the bench a lot, but, great opportunity for him to be embedded with the pros.
For sure. I did a little bit of research just to see, did he light up League One Alberta or the MSL? And the short answer is he wasn't exactly a goal scoring machine. I think he's played, 4 matches in League One Alberta, and I think something like 8 matches in AMSL. And I didn't see any goals or assists. But of course, as we know, that's not necessarily a definitive evaluation of how the player is. But I was just kind of curious. I thought, is this somebody who scored a couple buckets of goals or something like that? And it doesn't look that way, but he did play regularly over the summer with the Cavs U21s, though, for sure.
And it's like Tommy says, he's good on both sides of the ball in midfield. So he might be that box to box midfielder or maybe even a deep lying midfielder, and goals and assists aren't really his game. Maybe he's more about breaking up the opponent's play or starting an attack from deep. But I mean, good overall. It's extra depth for Cavalry's midfield. It seems like they've had a few injuries in that area this season, so maybe he'll have an opportunity or two to show what he can do in the CPL.
Yeah, and the other roster move was converting Michael Harms's contract from a developmental one to a full pro contract. That was also announced, and that's probably not really much of a surprise overall. He's been with the club now for quite a while, so it seems like he's someone who the Cavs think he's got a future with the club and want to lock it into a full professional deal. So good for him. That's good news.
Yeah, we alluded to this earlier this episode, but another youngster, he's only 17, and he had that game at right back earlier this season and did quite well. And you and I both talked about him a few times on the podcast and how we expected that he would play a few more times this year. And it looks like, especially if they're still short of U21 minutes, I expect that he will.
Yeah, I've been surprised that he hasn't featured in the 18 too much lately, but I think we will probably see him here before the end of the year at some point. So, but yeah, that's it. Roster freeze time. So as I understand the CPL rules now, you can still release a player, but you can't sign anybody new. No transfers. There hasn't been any transfers for a while, but what you've got is what you've got.
Last thing I kind of want to mention is something I saw. Someone tweeted this. I can't remember who it was, but they kind of likened Calgary to a Brampton 2.0, which I thought was interesting. Brampton,
Yeah.
If you follow Canadian soccer, a lot of national team members and a lot of Canadian soccer success stories are guys from Brampton, right? Atiba Hutchinson, Kyle Laren, I want to say.
Junior Hoylett, I think.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of players from Brampton who've gone on to bigger and better things. And someone said Calgary is starting to kind of be like that. You look at, the likes of Victor Latourie and Willie Akio, Dominic Zator, Arabin Pepple, Gaute Natigny, all guys who've come through Calgary and gone on to clubs in bigger leagues. You got Mo Farsi as well, who obviously isn't from Calgary, but spent quite a bit of time here. Joel Waterman, same thing. So it is kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of reasons for this, and I think our podcast has kind of talked about those reasons throughout its existence. But I just thought it was cool to see these names rattled off and think like, yeah, wow, Calgary really has come quite a long way since the inaugural CPL season 5 years ago or 4 years ago, I suppose.
Yeah, on a per capita basis, I would say that Calgary is doing pretty well when it comes to producing soccer talent right now. And I think, yeah, there's probably a bunch of different factors in it, but I think, when you look at it, having a high performance program like with the Cavs and with Foothills, and having that coaching and having that sort of framework in place makes a big difference. Like, I'll give you an example, a non-soccer example, which I think is kind of relevant here, is that when you look at Canadian football in the CFL, Saskatchewan produces on a per capita basis a much higher percentage of players that play pro football, play either in the CFL, and there's certainly people that are in the NFL that are from the Saskatchewan football factory, so to speak. And when you think about Saskatchewan, 1 million people, they produce a lot of gridiron players. And why is that? And a lot of it is because they kind of have the structures in place. They've had a long tradition of players that, even if they're not from there, retire there and then get involved in coaching and that sort of thing. So they've kind of built this whole kind of system and infrastructure, which has really developed a lot of football players. And I think you're starting to see that kind of something with kind of similar parallels when it comes to what's going on here in Calgary with soccer. Does that make any sense, Scott? You know where I'm going with on that?
I see where you're coming from. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like Saskatchewan Roughriders players who retire and then maybe stay in Saskatchewan somewhere, get involved with coaching at the local grassroots or high school level. And, they themselves are role models and they inspire the next generation to kind of follow in their footsteps. In Calgary, we have a lot of guys who, and women too, who are coaching. They've been there, done that. I can rattle off probably 8 or 9 names of people who've played in Europe, or they've played in South America, or they've played in the CPL, who are now coaching in Calgary. And the players they're coaching hear those stories and they realize that it's possible. And guys like Michael Harms, who were 12 or 13 when the CPL started, now they're at an age where it's feasible for them to play in it. And, that's pretty remarkable and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there's something about even just having some of these people in the world, in the community, even if they're not even like your coach, like there's just value to that. Like even we talked about with the AMSL final a few weeks back, and how Tony Amobi, who was a player for FC Edmonton, who I can't remember where he's from, someplace in the States, I believe. And now he's settled. He's a lawyer in Edmonton. And, I think just having players like that who they're sort of in the background and sort of part of the furniture, maybe they're not full-time soccer coaches, but having those people in your community, I think there's a lot of value there. And that's even when it comes down to like the whole Saskatchewan Roughriders example. They're retired Roughriders everywhere you look in Regina, like, selling cars, doing whatever. And some of them are coaching high school on the side, and some of them are really involved in football or not. But I think there's just something about that whole community that really helps the next generation.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on there.
Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap up this episode of the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast using all the usual podcasting platforms. You can head over to our website at yycsoccer.com for more information about how to subscribe or to leave a question or comment. And you can also follow us on Twitter at YYC Soccer 43. Thanks for listening.